some of you may be
in progress.
Sorry, that's
Got
okay.
to record.
We're conscious that some of you may be working in industry sectors that may not be regulated, so your interactions with the Financial Intelligence Unit and the Economic Crime Unit may not be as regular as those in the regulated sector. So we thought this would be a good place for you to just kind of meet the various representatives from the agencies and find out about how they can help, the advice that they can give, and just sort of start to build those connections. So in terms of what we'll cover this morning, I'll talk to you a little bit about the strategy, how we came to where we got to with the document, kind of what you would expect. Some of you may have been into the document already, some of you may not, so I'll just give you a quick little heads up on how we got the sort of journey that we followed to get to where we are. Introductions to the FIU and the ECU, so Dave and Darren will kind of talk you through what they do and things that they would like you to know, things that they can help you with. And then really the bulk of the session we're hoping is to turn it over to you, and any questions that you have or any feedback that you'd like to give that we can incorporate into the strategy document, just to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be. So how we got here. So why do we have the project? Why do we have a national strategy to look at the island's response to bribery and corruption? As part of our international obligations as a financial centre, the island is required to conduct a national risk assessment. And in 2020, our national risk assessment, so that's really into risks of money laundering and terrorist financing, proliferation financing. And one of the risks that the 2020 assessment demonstrated was that bribery and corruption, and mainly the laundering of the funds derived from the predicate offence of bribery and corruption, is something that, while we have agencies in the island who are tasked with tackling some of those areas, actually in terms of how joined up our approach is, there was room for improvement and opportunity for us to really present a much more coordinated approach. So the result of that was the Anti-Bribery and Corruption project, and I'm the project manager for that, to introduce that island-wide approach. So looking at the money laundering, the money laundering aspects of making sure that corruptly obtained wealth doesn't come into the island through our finance centre. Also, where businesses may be operating across multiple jurisdictions, that they are alert and wise to the potential risks of engaging in bribery and corruption, and that they have really good processes in place to protect themselves, to protect the island. And also from that place of, we live in a small community, we all know each other, and we have an expectation and a right to know that our public services are operating according to the highest governance principles and standards. So looking at that piece really across the island, across all three of those aspects. So we've engaged, we've kind of undertaken quite a lot of engagement, talking to people in industry. We ran a survey of bribery awareness. So thank you very much to those of you who filled in that survey, who circulated it through your businesses. We got almost 700 responses, which was absolutely fantastic. It's given us a huge amount of data and a huge amount of information. What it has shown is that people are pretty comfortable to be able to, well, they feel that they're pretty comfortable to be able to recognise bribery and corruption if they see it. Maybe not so much the other people in their organisation. So people are saying, I could recognise, but I'm not sure about whether my colleagues could. So that's something that we'll make sure that we build in. A lot of people are saying additional training, education, engagement, awareness, examples, things like that would be really helpful. So we're building that feedback in as well. So very much a you said we did approach. And the result of that engagement, that questionnaire, has started to inform what the anti-bribery and corruption strategy is going to look like. So we started off really with a mission statement. So actually, what is it that we're doing? Where do we want to get to? What's our overall objective? And our mission statement really is that we protect people from bribery and corruption, whether that's within the island, because we know that even if we fail to prevent bribery and corruption elsewhere, if that then filters through to our financial system, financial services system, the impact of potentially a grey listing is really, really significant. So we're protecting our own people, but actually we're protecting really vulnerable communities around the world as well. So we protect people from bribery and corruption in all its forms, whether it's perpetrated here or abroad. And with that vision, with that mission statement, we identified that there are three kind of vision statements that we need to achieve in order to be a jurisdiction that protects people from bribery and corruption. One, we recognise it when we see it. The second one is that we have clear, confidential and accessible reporting channels. So Darren will be talking about some of the work that the ECU does. Dave will be talking about some of the ways that we can already report it to the Financial Intelligence Unit, and actually part of the project is working on a confidential reporting form, so anybody can go online and confidentially report something that maybe they're not too sure about, might not pass the smell test. And that when we have recognised it, we have reported it, the Isle of Man utilises a robust response to bribery and corruption that's coordinated, that's underpinned by best practice. So we address it, we tackle it, we respond to it in the right way with all our agencies and all our organisations working together. So those were the three kind of vision statements. And in order to achieve those vision statements, we identified 5 strategic objectives. So we want to address the risk to the Isle of Man. So we identified those risks in the National Risk Assessment, and actually we need to make sure that those risks are being properly addressed. We reduce vulnerabilities to bribery and corruption within the public sector. That was something that was fed back to us quite strongly. And we demonstrate that the Isle of Man has a coherent approach to combating both domestic and international bribery and corruption. So that working together, making sure that agencies know where they fit in with each other, how they work together, and we coordinate that. Improving the detection, reporting and enforcement. So some of the reporting, some of the detection actually might be things that we can help the private sector with. Red flags, and policy templates, the reporting form, some of those, if there's further engagement or further training that we can help with. Actually, how do we know that our industry sectors are really on this and can look at an invoice and think, actually, I'm not too sure what this invoice is for. I think this might be something a little bit dodgy that I can flag or that I can speak to somebody about, contact potentially the FIU or the ECU. And finally, deliver a long-term and sustainable model for addressing the ongoing risks. So where is bribery and corruption, anti-bribery and corruption activities, where are they going to live for the long term in the island? How do we know that this strategy isn't something that everybody goes, do you know what, that's really nice, let's stick it on a shelf and not look at it for the next 5 years? So actually embedding that and changing the discourse, changing the language into behaviour, something that we all own and that we all recognise our responsibilities in. So we feel that by achieving those strategic objectives, and there are a number of actions underneath each of those, we hopefully can get to a place where we can tick yes to those vision statements, and that will help us to achieve that mission statement of protecting people from bribery and corruption. And the strategic objectives and the actions that sit within them, I guess those are, from point of view of feedback, it will be really interesting to hear from industry, from yourselves, whether you think that these are the right things to do, if you think there's something that maybe we haven't thought about, if you think that there are other ways that we could phrase something, if there's anything that's not clear that you feel that we could clarify a little bit, that's some of the feedback, because this strategy then is going to be applied. It's going to run for the next 5 years. So really, it is a blueprint and a framework against which we hopefully in the island can all work. So. The document, those of you who've read it will recognise these 5 sections. We've articulated the statement and the vision at the front of the document. And then we go on to defining the issue. So what is bribery? What is corruption? We've hopefully made it clear that actually neither of those involves always financial gain. Sometimes bribery, sometimes corruption can take the form of other advantages, private school fees. Sometimes it's just kind of social standing, social status, and other less tangible benefits. Concert tickets could be something. So hopefully that link between bribery and not necessarily being just a financial advantage. I think we're beyond the brown envelope being handed over the desk. So it might be recognizing behaviors that might not be physically handing money over, but nonetheless convey an advantage in exchange for the improper behavior or the improper application of a process or a policy. Likewise, corruption. We look at corruption as an umbrella term encompassing fraud, embezzlement, other crimes actually sit under that umbrella of corruption. So we've tried to kind of clarify that in the defining the issue. The third section is kind of how we're doing things already. So addressing the issues, what our agencies are already doing, how they all work together. And part of the project going forward and part of the strategy going forward is making sure that those agencies are supported to communicate and to really act and are empowered to act in the most effective way possible. So that might be looking at legislation, that might be looking at policies to assist. And actually that's something in terms of your own industries, taking back how are we currently addressing bribery and corruption in our own business, in our own organisation? What are our policies like? How up to date are they? If I had to pull them out and use them in anger, my HR department had to take disciplinary action against somebody, for example, does my policy allow and empower them to do that? We talked about the strategic objectives and actions, so that's what we're going to be doing over the next 5 years. And finally, the fifth section is beyond the strategy. So how do we know that these objectives and these actions are actually working? What are we going to measure them against? So that section is looking at what would we expect to be seeing done differently if these actions and if these activities are applied and are working and are successful. We would potentially, Darren and his team would potentially be seeing more activity around bribery and corruption as people start reporting. Dave and his team will possibly start to be getting more Section 24 reports. Actually, that doesn't mean that things are getting worse, that might mean that things are getting better. So those are some of the considerations that we're looking at in that fifth section. So the consultation that's online, we've asked some quantitative questions, yes, no, maybes, 1 to 5s, which are great. We've also got free text boxes. So actually anything that we haven't thought about, anything that you're sitting and thinking from my industry perspective, this is never going to work. Or from my industry perspective, you've missed a huge gap. And this is really what we need from strategy. That free text is invaluable to us. So from your perspective, do the suggested strategic objectives and actions get us where we need to go? So the consultation runs until the 19th of April. We'd be really keen to hear any of your thoughts kind of up front today. I've got some business cards which I'll leave on the table, so if you prefer to contact me direct, I'd be really happy to hear from you. Otherwise, please feel free to go onto the consultation website, give us your thoughts on the strategy, any questions that you have. We'd be really, really pleased to hear from you. And I'm going to hand you over to Dave now, just to talk a little bit about what the FIU does and the space that they play in this role.
Thank you. Some people are quite amused really when they realise the whole financial intelligence unit. We've got nothing to do with government spending or where they spend the finances. Going back to risk assessment, so in 2015 there was a national risk assessment where the Ireland government recognised that the financial intelligence unit had to be operationally independent. It used to be a function of constabulary, but to satisfy money value requirements, it had to be operationally 2 weeks before the assessors turned up on the Isle of Man, this financial intelligence unit was established, and we escorted the Money Val assessor around our office and said, hey, we've got a financial intelligence unit. And they said, well, what have you been up to? We said, well, we've only been around for a couple of weeks. So not very much. So it's very difficult for us to demonstrate our effectiveness. But we were established by the FIU Act, and there are our core functions. And the top couple are probably ones that we're going to talk mostly about, which is receiving, gathering, analysing, storing, and sharing information about financial crime. At the moment, we deal hugely with the regulated sectors. There are, if you're regulated or registered with the FSA or the GSC, then there are things that you have to do. Generally, we don't need to tell those sectors about what we do because they know it's part of their core business, it's part of their core risk assessments, and we get 2,000 to 3,000 pieces of information from those sectors each year. We work on those, we analyse them, we distribute them to where they need to go, whether that's the economic crime unit on the island or further afield. But we are the central hub for financial intelligence for the island. Bound by a piece of bits of legislation. First will be the Price of Crime Act. There are things in there which mean that the regulated sector, registered sector, have to report to the auditors, and also the Anti-Bribery and Corruption Act. Really important one for us as the Financial Intelligence Unit Act. It's a really simple piece of legislation. It's really easy to read, but it is so powerful. So under that, we've got a number of powers. Section 24 is one of our favourites, in that it enables any person to tell us anything that they think we may need to conduct our functions. So if you go back to the so if you have any piece of information, you can tell us under Section 24, and we can take that information and share it. As an intelligence unit, we would be useless if we didn't share information and collect information. So people who think that we hoard all this information together and don't do anything with it, it's really important for us that we can share it. We also need to receive it as well. So we end up with lots and lots of information. And if we can get information from the regulated and the unregulated sector and all the other places that we get information from, it makes our lives much easier. And as you can imagine, with current geopolitical events, we've been really busy and trying to gather as much information from as many sources as we can about certain oligarchs, potential oligarchs, and trying to build that picture together and see if we've got something that we don't need to share. Also under the Financial Intelligence Unit Act, we have the Section 18 piece of legislation which enables us to request from various people certain information. So we don't need to call to orders. Say we get a piece of information that says Joe Bloggs has been receiving £50,000 in bribes and he banks with HSBC. We can go to HSBC tomorrow without a court order and say we want to look at his statements, and we can start verifying that. Should we then need to disseminate that wider to the crime unit, they would then need a court order so they can use that piece of information. But it really cuts down the time taken to get that investigation moving, to verify whether that piece of information is correct and to whether there's anything for the economic crime unit to then look into. We're also the receiving office actions. So there was a report recently, but we receive all of the sanctions reports. Generally, they get sent straight into Customs and Excise. But that all builds part of our intelligence picture, so we're able to build onto that. One of the things I hear a lot of people shouting about GDPR. They come to us and say, I've got some experts in the room. On the Section 33, it says Data Protection Act 2018, actually says the older Action Act, but it's in place. There's nothing in the FIU Act authorising disclosure and contradiction of any provisions of the Data Protection Act. There's data which basically you've just got to make sure that you're giving us information which complies with our functions. So, for instance, if you have a client that you want to tell us about, then yes, you can tell us about that client, but you wouldn't give us your entire list of clients. You've got to protect the privacy of the rest of your client book. So although you can tell us information, you just got to be sure that you're looking. Is that right?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just trying to work out what the wording was that was underneath.
Is that going to move across?
It doesn't matter.
Which are not exempt from those protections.
Yeah, I mean, there's also provisions in the GDPR regulations as well, which specifically.
There's nothing within GDPR is designed to stop you sharing law enforcement if you suspect there's a crime. But obviously when we start saying to people, we can share that with the FIU, they would go away and they come back and say, well, I don't think we can share it because of GDPR. We get that with other controls.
I don't know, so you better. Thank you, sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, so we get lots of people pushing back to us and saying, we can't do that. Got it in the FIU, but we do what we need to do to let us on from being attacked and also get victims of that. Because some people see money laundering as a victim as well. But actually money laundering, you've got to have one policy. So you've got to have that, there has to be something there to law them, and there is a victim of that. However, that is a low value fraud, which is easy to deal with, whether that's people trafficking or drugs or people taking money out of Ukraine or selling weapons or anything else like that. There is always something. So money laundering is a business crime, and it's very easy to tell us.
I'm moving up because I'm click on here.
I thought I was doing it.
Can you just raise your voice?
Yeah. Go back.
Go back. Oh, right, you go. Yeah. Oh, technology.
So one of the things we're working on is public-private partnerships. So that's really important to us. Our outreach to ourselves and another industry, we want people to know we exist. If we can't collect information, people don't know we exist, we can't do our job. We also see the value in industry experts. We can't be, we're a team of 16 and we can't be experts in every single field. We really rely on industry to be able to go out and speak to those relationships that we have with the industry. So part of this year's strategic plan is to develop a public-private partnership model, which will have member staff that is completely dedicated to going out and creating cells to deal with specific problems. So for instance, if we have a particular risk assessment about cryptocurrency or we must, then we would go out and we would create a cell under that, which would have government experts, but also have industry experts as well. It can also go down as far as operational. So if we've got a crime that we're investigating, that we know that a number of banks and CCCs have an interest in because of the shared clients, we can have them all in the same room. We can tell you all about this crime and we can task people to go off and help us get information. We don't like the sort of cold face of law enforcement effect. We'd much rather tell a story and then get information back. So quite often, if we just go and say we need to see some of these bank statements, it gives the industry a lot more. We get a lot more information back if we tell a story. So if we go to them and say, well, we're actually interested in this person because we believe they're a drug dealer, and we get information back, they say, okay, well, we've looked at this person's account, we can't see it, here's a statement to your passport, but we also looked at the wife's account because we don't have a drug bank account. The wife has received lots of weird cash payments which we wouldn't have received. So again, we wouldn't get more information back if we just go out and say we want to check those bank statements. All we do is get check those bank statements back. Whereas if we tell a story and have that interaction, then we'll get better information back, which fulfills our functions. We're also really keen on reducing silos with government and industry. So, as you can imagine, I found myself on the Ukrainian border 3 or 4 weeks ago. And when I came back to the island, I found that I had a lot of work to do. So we looked at, as you can imagine, we looked at every possible angle in the government where there might be some Russian influence or sanctions, or information that we know could be abuse. So we went out to all government departments, and it's about breaking the silos down. The government is not one university, it's many, so we all have our own DPOs, and trying to get access to the databases can be a little bit tricky. We are really keen to start seeing those silos reduced, so that we can look at one government development as a holistic single brick, and being able to get all that data. So you imagine I can take the aircraft registry and I want to overlay that with the shipping registry and I'll overlay that with the company's registry, turn on our own intelligence database, and then we can bring in UK's company house data and all this other stuff. And eventually we want to be able to pick out that one person that's committing that crime, that's because they're receiving money from someone they shouldn't. slowly getting in. Because we're so new, it gives a huge advantage over other departments who are, they've got lots of things happening. Whereas this is our one focus, we're really trying to push that into her role in preventing bribery and corruption. We're going to be the reporting centre for anti-bribery and corruption reports as well. So when you fulfil the format, it will come straight to the FIU, and then we will then direct it to where it needs to be. We have no ministerial oversight, so we're not operationally independent. We will take everything that's sent out to where it needs to go. Just get the confidence building within that, because reporting to the government about the government. People aren't always getting anything like that when I try to build that up. We don't see journalists or private investigators as adversaries. We see them as allies where we can. So if somebody comes to us with a package, if a journalist rings us up and speaks to them, we might not be able to give them any information back. Most of them respect that, but actually taking the information in is our job. We listen to anybody that wants to talk to us about our functions. Anything to do with our functions, you can bring with you and talk to us about. And yeah, that's really happy to take any questions. I've been there since the beginning, and yeah, I've always been there.
Great, thanks, Dave. So we'll probably quite a good time then to link in with Darren and the economic crime unit and some of the ways that that they can engage and help in the fight against bribery and corruption. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Dave, and good morning all. Erica, in her introduction, referred to the purpose of being here, really. And one thing is, first of all, just to let you know who I am, let you know where the ECU, the Economic Crime Unit, are based. Basically, the staff that we've got in there at the moment. I'm not wishing to contradict what David just said about the gateways of reporting, but just to make you aware of those other ways that information can be passed to law enforcement or to the FIU as well for obviously for assessment of the amount of information that's received or if there's any sort of investigation that follows from there. So first question I was asked really just to sort of answer was around what the Economic Crime Unit do at the moment to address bribery and corruption. So the Economic Crime Unit, we're based in Mode. There's an establishment at the moment of 20 staff. That includes supervision, myself, and 10 detective constables. Also within the team, we've got 7 civilian financial investigators, along with an in-house prosecutor, attorney generals, an office manager, and also an analyst as well. That is set to grow. It's awaiting ministerial approval at the moment of funding. The Economic Crime Unit will build over the next sort of 24 months, probably. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it's probably another third in size of what it is already, so we're looking at 30 plus staff. Now that primarily is in response to preparing for the next money value assessment, into 2026 was the last date I heard. But within our capability will include investigating bribery and corruption, and certainly being the go-to primarily from Dave's team, the FIU, in terms of making that assessment of whether we develop an investigation or whether we just record it. So in terms of what we've had to really sort of get into gear really is that our go-to for training and accreditations is the City of London Police. They're the lead in terms of the UK we go to for our training. So the detective constables in particular will do the specialist fraud investigative programme. There's a number already, including myself, who have engaged on the ICIO programme, which includes bribery and corruption. And that's really sort of setting the foundation moving for the gateway moving forward there. So within the Economic Crime Unit, both the detectives and ultimately the civilian investigators will have that accreditation endorsed by the City of London Police to primarily deal with fraud, money laundering, which we take on domestically and internationally, but we will also have that capability as well to investigate bribery and corruption. So that's what we've done really, that's what is ongoing, really, to prepare ourselves for that. We also have that recipe of experience really within the economic crime unit, and this is not disrespect to any of the departments within the force, but if we look at the makeup and the age of most detectives and civilian investigators within the economic crime unit, generally speaking, we are more experienced in other parts of the force, such as the CID and even the drugs team as well. The youngsters coming through and developing and learning there. But in terms of looking at dealing with serious and complex investigation, our team really are equipped to do that, and are always the go-to, or have been the go-to certainly for the most serious and organised crime. Any matters which requires got sensitivity around as well. People come to the ECU. It helps being detached from the police as well. It helps physically being detached as well in terms of being based down into mode. But the long and short of it really is that with that experience and capability we've got within the team, if we do get such a referral from the FIU, which may be generated from yourselves, it comes through the Attorney General, we've got that capability and that experience to deal with it. Without talking in any detail at the moment, this is not something that's new to us. Bribery and corruption it's obviously it's been around for a long time. The ability to deal with it, as I said, is something that we're preparing for and trying to build on. But we are investigating bribery and corruption on the Isle of Man for speaking, and we have been for the last number of years. It's certainly my experience within the crime unit, and I've been there 7 years now. Thankfully, touch wood, we haven't. It's not our primary bread and butter that we deal with, but there's certainly investigations ongoing that's gone on now for 3 years. It's about 3 years. There's certainly 2 live bribery and corruption investigations which involve both the domestic footprint and also the international footprint as well. So it's here. It's very much alive. The point that Erica made in terms of as soon as we start collectively trying to deal with bribery and corruption and demonstrate how we're dealing with bribery and corruption, that is going to invoke obviously a greater volume of reporting, but that's a good thing. What we investigate at the end of that is different. We don't know yet. We don't know whether that percentage will grow or not. It might not. But obviously, in getting going and addressing it and sharing the information, that's clearly going to be incumbent on both the FIU and ourselves. And the team develop to assess and deal with it. Just touched on some of the reports from the FIU. Tell me, Dave, if I'm wrong, but over the last, in relation to some reports that we've had in relation to bribery and corruption, we've had 60. So the last count I had in terms of intelligence reports from yourself, and 28 of those linked to those other live investigations that I mentioned. So, as I say, it's very much up to the
And involving huge sums of money
yes,
as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's
and I say I can't talk in too much detail about the domestic, but also the international footprint as well. They've mentioned that in terms of the gateways and obtaining information, but obviously also part of our response is the gateways and the mechanisms we have for obtaining information from different jurisdictions as well. So whether that be a letter of request from the Attorney General to with respect to CPS or prosecuting a different jurisdiction, that's really one of the main ways in which we would get that information. Ultimately for evidential purposes.
Sadly, it's taken a long time, didn't they? I mean, not on our side, but you could put a request out to a country and it can take months.
Yeah.
If months would be a good turnaround for another country.
But sometimes you're surprised. You might request something maybe in South Africa or even Pakistan, for example, or India. Dubai, for example, we had a very quick turnaround of information. We requested from them. The UK took a couple of years, so there's no hard and fast rule with it really. But I think the important thing is that those gateways are there, the legal mechanisms there to obtain that information. So if one of your teams, for example, reported the FIU came to us, we assessed there is an investigation there, and there was an international footprint, even if it might not be bribery and corruption on the Isle of Man, we've got that capability and function to share that information, to develop that intelligence before that evidence jurisdiction. So that's also part of our capability. Which is some reporting mechanisms, as I say, I'm not here to sort of underline obviously the route that will be the norm really in terms of reporting bribery and corruption through to the FIU. But it goes without saying really, those gateways still exist in terms of as you would report any crime or information that you suspect is wrong or criminal. Police headquarters is still there. You know, we still get walk-ins, we've still got the ECA, the control room, there's still Crime Stop as well, telephone calls in where people just don't want to give their names and details, which we will still record that information. And there's other areas as well. You know, some people will write to the chief, which the stories then comes down to our department. Some people will write to sort of the professional complaints departments as well. So there's many sort of existing routes really where if you are concerned that there is bribery and corruption there, or you're unsure, there are plenty of avenues to share that concern with, and that's what I'd say one of the more traditional routes. As you said at the opening, one of the main reasons for me being here really is actually just to raise your awareness of that if for whatever reason police headquarters are not their sort of preferred route, along the details at the end, the economic crime units are there for direct reporting as well. So again, not to undermine what Dave and the FIU are doing. If you just want to talk to myself or one of the team within the economic crime unit, we're based in Tremont. We've got the main number separate to the police. All our individual contact numbers as well, and email. I can share all those and recirculate again if that's really helpful. We are there for any conversation you want to have around legislation, how it's going to work in practice, any information or concerns that you have. We're here really for everybody. I wasn't really going to touch on the legislation as such, because it's not my expertise, that's for the lawyers. I can have an interpretation of what's within the Act, and I appreciate it won't affect probably the majority of people in the room, but some of the sort of sections and offences within that Act, I just want to sort of raise really, which of interest for me, and I think so you've got all information really, is the section 13, the duty of certain public officials to report bribery. Again, it might not necessarily affect everybody in the room now, but that has to be now, as you see from the legislation, reported to a constable. It'll be a bit open for interpretation as to what represents a constable, but if you're phoning up police headquarters and you're reporting to the economic crime unit and you ask to speak to the detective or one of the supervisor or myself, you are reporting it to the constable. But probably the more sort of poignant offence within the legislation I wanted to sort of mention really was the section 10, which is the failure of commercial organisations to prevent bribery. This is more likely probably going to be more on your radar in terms of if there was somebody you were aware of within your organisation who had committed that, it's turned into an investigation. You can very much sort of guarantee that the questions then will be asked of, okay, what has the commercial organisation done or not done to prevent bribery and corruption taking place. I don't think it's circulated as yet.
No, I'll send it to Rebecca for circulation in terms of the Bribery Act guidance.
Yeah, there's from what I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, Erica, but it's the six principles within that which really represent adequate procedures, and that's what you'll probably home in on when you look at that offence in terms of like, what have or haven't we done or could we have done better there. It's those principles and it's the adherence or not to those adequate procedures which you'll probably be more interested in than some of the offences which are in the legislation. So there is guidance out there, it will be circulated. If you wanted to have a look now, if you've not already looked, the UK 2010 Bribery Act guidance is exactly the same word, exactly the same, pretty much word for me. It's a lift to what will be circulated by the DHA. So I think that's going to be available on the website.
Yeah, it is available now, but you have to Google it. If you Google Isle of Man Bribery Act Guidance 2013, it will take you to it, but it's kind of tucked away on a dark corner of the government website. So we'll make it much more available, and we'll send a link round so that you can access it without having to go through a search engine.
Just finally, if we receive information, whether it be through reports of mention referral from FIU, with your contact details, or whether it's a direct conversation that we have down in ECU, it's difficult to say what will follow that, and what the expectation will be. But certainly, if you wish to discuss matters and you have concern, that might be just recorded and no further action is taken with that. It might be recorded and we assess it to be intelligence or something that we need to be aware of, which still might not develop into an investigation. But that level of conversation will take place between it's that direct call between yourselves and the ECU. If information is reported through the FIU and it comes to us and it's assessed, there's intelligence and or suspicion and evidence there of a crime report will be generated. So it will be an ethical crime will be generated, there'll be an investigation that proceeds from that. Depending on who is reporting it and what the agreement is in terms of the contact or future liaison. If you are, if you are reporting something and you have concerns about your own sort of anonymity or a colleague, that's something that we talk to as well in terms of what we do to protect that, but manage your expectations as to what we do with that information. So it's difficult to tell really what the response will be if a matter is reported. In a very sort of general rule, I suppose, to the types of crime, obviously if you were the victim or sometimes a witness of that crime, there would be a conversation between the investigating officer and yourselves, really in terms of, okay, well, this is what's going to happen from here, this is the time scale when things will happen, and have an agreement really when I update you with things that have or haven't happened. So that's what we'd normally expect, but it's difficult to tell at the moment how in practice the information will fit through.
And ultimately, sometimes that nugget of information can lead us to find the information another way, which doesn't involve those reporting. So there are lots and lots of avenues. It's a case-by-case basis.
Generally, don't feel that you have to be silent. There are lots of ways of approaching reporting, and lots of ways that the ECU and the FIU can work with witnesses or victims, or actually if you see something going on in your organisation that you're not comfortable with, talking about it and reporting it is really the best way.
And the opener to sharing information or any concerns that you have can be covered in that initial conversation as well. Especially with it being new legislation, trying to have that collective approach to it. I went myself and one of my team. If you wish to speak to somebody and it is a competition, so trying to talk things through, the ground rules will be set from the start of that conversation. Really, obviously, if there was any suspicion of criminality there, we'd be discussing that, and no further after that. The ground rules will be set really in terms of if you need to report it live with the challenge. But the purpose really, I think my details on the next slide really. So I'm here, our team are here really for any sort of referrals that you have, whether that be formal or informal. Happy to speak anytime, happy to take any emails from there's a whole bunch of people, whether it's my personal email or the NECU general inbox as well. So I think that's probably the main message really, that we're here to sort of receive any information or concerns that you have. Start making a hole in it.
Thank you so much,
Okay,
Darren.
thank you everyone.
So what I'll do actually is I'll just put all of our details, so I thought it would be quite a useful time then just to move to questions and feedback, but while we're doing that, I've just popped all of our details up on the screen if anybody wants to take them down. I'm conscious that some people may have a hard stop, but Darren, Dave and I are pretty much, we're fairly flexible, so you know, very happy to stay and answer any questions or take any feedback that you may have. And especially if anything's also come through from our colleagues on Zoom as well.
Yeah, I've got a question. I've always got a question.
Good.
And I thought I'd ask it because of the range of people that we've got in the room. And what got me thinking about it was we've got live investigations. They're ongoing for now 3 years. Yeah, so they're obviously serious in nature. Yeah, but obviously we've seen the UK. They brought in a few years ago unexplained wealth orders, and it was more with an AML and a terrorism focus. Yeah. But clearly we have an opportunity here. We're talking about bribery and corruption. You know, do we think we have the right powers already, or is this something we're actively exploring in this area and/or across the other legislation? Yeah.
It's a really, really great question, and it's one that we've thought about. So within the strategy, I can't remember exactly under which headline it is, but we have committed to exploring unexplained wealth orders in the island, and part of what we're doing is absolutely looking at legislation and policy and making sure that it supports our organisations and our agencies to act appropriately, that it's up to date, that it does what we need it to do. And yes, unexplained wealth orders. We're also undertaking a collaborative approach looking at the Proceeds of Crime Act as well, which was named under the financial crime strategy. So very much linking in with that. Yes.
So I've got 2 questions actually.
Go on.
So the first one is it's an admin question, probably more David, but it's a reporting purpose. If the FIU is going to be the central hub for reporting bribery and corruption, usually we report that directly because it's a crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we're starting to report that directly to the FIU in the regulated and registered sector, would we receive the same? Would we no longer have to report under the Proceeds of Crime Act, because it's almost inherently obvious that we're suspicious that if there's bribery and corruption, there's going to be a money laundering offence?
If you're a regulated entity and you already use those, then yes, that would be the way you report it. And you could write something that please consider this report for us. I wouldn't expect it.
Exactly.
I think it would be very hard pressed to prosecute somebody for failing to report when you have actually reported to the FIU. And yes, you're right, of course.
I think where we're going with the reporting form is recognising that not every business, not every industry has access to Themis as a registered Themis user, and actually we're all citizens as well. We're all taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer, and I want to know that if I've seen something out of my front window that I think, I don't know if this is a crime, but it's really something that I'm not happy with, and I've got somewhere that I can go and report it and say, do you know what, I've seen this, it happened on this day, and then it's kind of in and done. You're absolutely right, with the Bribery Act, certainly as a public official, to discharge your duty under that, if you're offered, so if I was offered a bribe by any one of you, which I won't need, no, I would not take it, I would not take any advantage, no. If I was offered a bribe as a public official, I would have to report that to the constabulary as under that legislation. Whereas if there was just something that you haven't seen, so the reporting form that we're putting in is in addition as opposed to instead of.
It's a publicly accessible form which requires no authentication, and I don't doubt the first few months of getting it in will be some absolutely interesting reports from various people.
That's good, because it means that people are engaging.
Yes. But it's always so.
Yeah, so the second question, so actually I come from an e-commerce area, so we don't get all the underlying information that you might expect in a bank. Most of the times when we get notified of bribery and corruption through adverse media, so it would be really helpful if the Isle of Man was able to release additional information on what jurisdictions the Isle of Man specifically is being targeted from bribery and corruption. So what our existing customer base is and what our exposure is. Because at the moment, as a non-regulated entity, and we don't often receive bank accounts unless there's a trigger event. We're only based on Transparency International and the public domain information that's available to try and judge our risk assessment. So from an Isle of Man specific area, it'd be very helpful to understand our Isle of Man exposure.
In terms of exposure to specific countries.
I just got, just jumping in.
I think this gentleman was.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back on the unexplained wealth orders.
Yeah.
Thing. I don't know if you're aware, but the Deemster and police have actually used Pocket in a way that effectively replicates unexplained wealth orders already. So it's actually been done.
That is there a case reference on that?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it has been done.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
It's interesting now that they've been in place in the UK for a while. Reports about showing how ineffective unexplained wealth orders actually
Yeah,
are.
they've got bloody nose on the last one.
Yeah,
So I did like the one about the last walking around Harrods. Interesting.
Yes.
You got to the front door.
the sees all this.
I just wanted to, it's for Dave really. Dave, you were talking about breaking down silos. Given that the hoods always have the initiative, and therefore you'll need to be timely and agile in your response, what work's actually being done to build shared consciousness and relationships to break down those silos across government?
That would be the public-private partnerships that's very good, and having those very specific cells in place. It would be nice to be able to see some form of shared intelligence between banks. And that would be a pipe dream really going forward, whereby in the UK they can do what's called a super suspicious activity report, where we can give permission to entities to come together. And we sort of did what they used to the legitimate process in the UK, where you get vetted members from all of the companies in the oil industry. We know that they're safe, we know that they're vetted to the highest level, and we can actually sit down and share matter, and we know that they can go away and come back. And it's about having that information sharing. But yeah, the public-private partnerships, we can share the paper, and the group has got to the financial crisis student board about public-private partnerships and what they're going to achieve. But it is about building cells around specific things that are happening. So we've had a Russian sanctions cell, we'd have a cryptocurrency class cell, or you'd have a retail banking cell, trying to get those people together in the same room and share information. We're open to ideas.
I'm just conscious for those that have got a hard stop, if you need to leave, please leave. But as Erica says, if you've got more questions or anything you want to speak about on a one-to-one basis, then is that okay?
Of
I just want to
course.
let people go if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Because otherwise, I'm sure we can.
I can talk about this all day.
But please do stay. You know, the room's ours in the morning. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'll leave a whole bunch of
Thank you so much. Please do carry on any conversations. I'll just let free those that need to leave.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, you still got some people.
We should just do some dimension on that. We didn't mind too. I was also thinking in terms of cross government. I mean, clearly the relationship between Maureen and Darren's. But I wonder to what extent is there sort of genuine sort of teams approach to liaison, that kind of thing.
So the FIU Act has two sections, section 30 and section 31. One of them makes it a duty for the Consolidated Customs and Excise to act with the FIU and to interact. But we already have that relationship, so I don't think we've ever had to hit that with a big stick at any point. But then there's also the other part of that, which enables every other government department to work with the FIU, as long as it's part of our functions. So So again, taking recent events, we were able to sit down and say, right, this is what, to form a proper risk assessment of Taliban and our risk assessment around Russian sanctions and what's going on. We need this information from these departments to do that.
Working.
Absolutely. And it works, and we got all the information we needed. There's obviously, again, there's hurdles to jump through. There's certain piece of information that the government collects, which is part of treaties with other governments. And there's some discussion over where those treaties sit, the tropic status of the FIU, and because it's international treaties that there's controls around it. But quite often we just have to have that discussion. And I know you control the amount of information exchange. I would say that if nothing good has come out of that situation, getting the government departments to discuss this very serious issue has been existing practice for us.
As Dave says, I think the legislation is there for us to share. In any event, if we didn't want to share for whatever reason, we're obliged to share from the outset and ongoing. If we develop our own investigation and intelligence comes up, we have to share an update. That's never had to be enforced as such, and it probably down to the fact that a lot of the people who worked in what was the previous financial crime unit know each other. They're either ex-cops or civilians now who have those relationships all in place now. I'd be lying if I said it was quite difficult in that split and that divorce, because it was almost people trying to find their way in terms of, right, can we share, can I speak, can I have that sort of formal conversation over the phone? And that took a while to overcome that, because I think it was new legislation, the barriers were up, but it was unnecessary really that those barriers needed to be there, as long as everybody does know what their particular remit is. Again, I think I'm being realistic in that, in terms of fraud, money laundering, referrals that become in terms of traditional crime as such. What and how far we go as enforcement and with the assistance of intelligence unit is ongoing. There are disagreements. There will be disagreements in terms of what the focus is, because we all can't do it on ourselves anyway. There has to be that collective approach, and also the capability within that as well. And even when we take on an investigation, the economic crime unit still has, and the police still have an intelligence function within that as well. So it's healthy, ongoing debate, but we have to work at it. It's not as easy as just sharing it and then right, you do this and you do that. But having said that, in a very positive vein, as soon as Putin went in and we knew there was going to be referrals, we know ourselves that there's a link to the bribery and corruption intelligence and potentially investigations out there concerning Russian oligarchs. Straight away, all the agencies were on it from day one. It was round the table. It was right. What can we collectively do? I think the AG's there, the ECU there, various senior members of government as well, to actually say, right, okay, what are we going to do to preempt those referrals coming in? What are we going to do now moving forward? And so I think, there's always going to be teeth and there's always going to be some healthy debate, but I think in terms of an element response, Russia being an example, we've been on straight away really from what I've seen. I think that's really what we're trying to encourage obviously today.
So just from breaking down silos again, I noticed that no one in here is only from any of the regulators, the FSA and the GSC. So as part of their legislation, there's a whistleblowing policy in most of them that usually they give the regulator a point of contact to speak to. Are you guys speaking with the regulators to be able to get some of those whistleblowing reports in relation to internal corruption that might be happening?
So the regulator is we have a representative from the regulator on the Anti-Bribery and Corruption steering group, the reason for there being nobody from the regulator this morning is probably an oversight on my part, because I was more sort of focusing on non-regulated industries who maybe hadn't had the relationship as closely with the FIU and the ECU, so it was as a kind of an introductory. There's no reason that we excluded them other than we thought that maybe it would be more helpful for non-regulated industries to have an introduction with the FIU, but certainly, and I can't speak on behalf of the regulator, but certainly if there are any questions that we can feed back to the FSA in terms of kind of what they anticipate happening with their whistleblowing policy, I'd be more than happy to. From a point of view of whistleblowing generally, in relation to bribery and corruption, we recognise that support for whistleblowers is really integral to that response to bribery and corruption, which is one of the reasons why the reporting form has been set up, and that can go as far as if you're working in a regulated or a non-regulated industry or a regulated industry, and actually you're thinking, do you know what, my MLRO might be part of the problem here. I don't feel comfortable going through my MLRO to make a FEMIS report because actually they might be implicit involved. You have the additional confidentiality of the reporting form, so making this as a Section 24, not through not through my MLRO, or you can pick up the phone to Dave and his colleagues, or actually if you think it's a crime, you can pick up the phone to Darren and his colleagues and say, I work in a regulated sector, but I don't feel comfortable going through the requisite channels. So yes, that reporting form, and that what we wanted to do with the reporting form and with the project as a whole is give people as many different routes that they can report as possible without kind of changing or doing away with any of the existing routes.
So the main reason I ask is because as an MRO myself, I have to give training, and we often direct them to the regulated website.
Yes.
For whistleblowing if they don't trust.
Yeah,
the MRO
yeah,
directly.
that doesn't need to change.
So it would be helpful if there's a link or some information in that whistleblower's website for this project, and actually you could go via this route if you're looking for
Absolutely, and I think that's really helpful feedback in terms of once the website is up and live, which we're in the process of procuring it now, making sure that on everybody else's website there's a link to everybody else's processes, so we can kind of close that loop as part of the as part of that sort of joint approach. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll make that. I'll make a note. So a link on the FSA website to the reporting form.
And the GSE's website as well,
Yeah.
wherever there's a whistleblowing requirement.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Can I just build on that question, really, what the general guidance that's going to come out to the industry? I saw in the strategy that you're going to do a template at some point. You mentioned about guidance on the 2013 Act. Have you got anything else where we can make sure that our policies and procedures are in line with where we're going with this?
So at the moment, the feedback that's come through from industry is that a template anti-bribery and corruption policy would be something that's helpful. So we will sort of work on that. We've been quite keen again to work with industry on that, making sure we have people have referenced the Office of Human Resources and government bribery policy, which they think is kind of clear enough. There are some really great policies out there from like big business. So Apple, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, some of those big multinational. I probably wouldn't do Ericsson at the moment, but there are some other really great multinationals who have anti-bribery and corruption policies, which will be, if you go onto a website called the FCPA blog, they have a link to a lot of international companies. It's an American website, but they look at kind of anti-bribery and corruption policies and just kind of publish them. So that's sometimes. There's also, of course, the ISO standards, which is, again, off the top of my head, I think it's 37001. How sad am I? And yeah, so the ISO has an anti-corruption policy as well. That's quite helpful. The other guidance that industry has spoken to us quite clearly about wanting is in relation to gifts and hospitality. So I'm speaking to my colleague at the FIU, Holly, who does a lot of the kind of education and guidance pieces about putting something out on just general principles around gifts and hospitality. That's something, you know, when is it fine, and actually when is it an absolute no-no, and sometimes that's case specific. It's but if there's anything else from industry and anything else that you're scratching your heads on, please do. Yeah, please let me know. And we want to be we want that website to be a resource that people can go to, and that can support them and help them in kind of doing the right thing.
Thanks, sorry, I've got to go.
No, thank you
Thanks
so
for the
much.
answer. And it was a great document, actually. I was very impressed with the second part.
Thank
Very
you.
specific and detailed.
Well, I really appreciate that's lovely feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that one of the things that Moneyval picked up was quality of reporting, which allegedly has been much improved by Dennis. I don't know if that's true. I don't care. But I just wondered, just picking up on the reporting aspect and making sure that you're getting the information you need from reports direct to you guys around this subject as well. Will there be some clarity of that in the guidance as well, in terms of the kind of information that is useful to intelligence? Because most people have no understanding of intelligence work anyway, so.
It'll be guided through the form, for starters, so there'll be quite specific fields as well as the general free text ones. Yes, the quality has improved. All credit to that really goes to the LROs, really guidance and filling what they need. And it's always a learning experience, but it's really hard. It's really hard to judge quality, because where you might have lost quality sales, but things might not progress for other reasons. Necessarily the sales and the very strange stuff, and it's just such a hard thing.
I appreciate that. I mean,
Guidance
when I'm delivering training, one of the things I always emphasise is all intelligence is useful.
Yes.
Yeah, more information is better than less information. Therefore, I know then some poor sap has to analyse it, but
Yes. But to say.
Just because people have no clue as to what useful intelligence looks like unless they've done some work in the field.
Yeah, and that's why I'm informed, hopefully, it will be geared to correct parents to do some tracking information we require to do something useful with, or the opportunity for us to go back to them and say, not be quite specific, I do not doubt that the first 3 or 4 months of put that format there, we will get every report about the DI being cut because it's taken so long to come up, or all of it, and that's just what we're going to have to do.
It'll look like the man line for the first 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no way around that.
No. Was it one African comedian said, if you lot think you've got corruption, you know nothing, you should come back and go to where I came from. Apparently we are definitely in the conference leagues.
Yes.
So I work on PwC's services, so we're pretty robust in areas like independence, anti-bribery and corruption. So I'm going to take the point away about gifts and hospitality, because this is what I can share with you. But the bit I was actually thinking about was, we talked about vulnerabilities in the public sector, and we might make some people squirm in the room in a moment, because one of the things that we have to do as part of our network standards is we subject all our senior personnel to independence testing by rotation, and that's usually, it depends, the terms change, it can be 3 to 5 years. And that does involve actually collecting information together about their assets, their bank accounts. It's quite intrusive, but it's done to protect the brand ultimately, independence across the network. So the point I guess I'm getting to is, when you look at an organisation like the Isle of Man Government, and it can be the commissioners and all the other public bodies on the island, we've got lots of key decision makers across multiple bodies. We have a centralised procurement function, and do we have the right powers? And do we then, and this comes partly down to HR as well, I accept, but in theory, what are we doing to routinely subject those people to some form of investigation? And do we do that at the moment? Is that how we should have under this legislation?
So within the FIU,
But that's that's when they're vetted, when they join. Are they maybe a regular?
It's an ongoing process,
Okay.
so it's done by the UK's vetting team, and it's all about your vulnerability as being right.
Yeah, no, that's fine. With somewhere like the FIU, the
Yeah.
Isle of Anti-Bribery, that's fine, but
In
we're talking
general.
about,
In
we're talking
general.
about
I
general.
think the
generally.
short answer is, I don't know, I can't speak on, obviously on behalf of the Office of Human Resources or
Yeah.
any of those other agencies. And part of the reason why we're sending the document out for public consultation is for exactly people in industry to say, hey, we've got this really great tool that we use, and it helps to keep our senior leadership really independent. Actually, what's the there may be an opportunity for you to include some of what we do that's really good practice into what you do.
Yeah, so I haven't done my feedback yet, but I was going to do it after this session. So don't worry, I'll make sure it's in
So
there.
if there's best practice that you're using and you think there's an opportunity for it to go into the strategy, that's all part of the feedback that we're really open to and really welcome.
Just imagining what happens when you start trying to do develop that on members of commissions and things.
Yeah, I mean,
they have a freaking.
For us, it is development, but
Yeah.
maybe using resources that you have experience of is that it's come through a private, that it's come through a different mechanism.
I'm just thinking too, because commercially, I know PwC, there are organisations, think people like Thomson Reuters Special Services who do commercial vetting.
Yeah, we don't do commercial
but
vetting, we do it internally, but I mean.
Sure, but there are, I'm just thinking in terms of resources available for that kind of work that couldn't possibly be done, resourced by government, but which could be along those lines. There are organisations around who do exactly that. And let's say TRSS, I know do that for all sorts of purposes on the commercial side.
As a taxpayer, I expect something will be done.
Yeah.
It's very hard for us to act without the feedback of the report. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's an interesting point, though.
Yeah, well,
really
that's why I said there'd probably be people squirming in the room.
No, it's really interesting.
Subject to it. Well, there would be if you widened it out to the 8,000 people across government.
That's what the first thing jumped into my mind. That's a really useful, interesting idea. I wonder how you do it.
And unfortunately, UK government's vetting process is very delayed in that because they need so concentrated in their own teams to get their own assessment.
It's a long process.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great. Are there any questions from that come through from Dan? No. Well, thank you so much for your really, really feedback.